All right, welcome to a live event. Steve, you got a question that you want to discuss today.
Yeah, it's more of like an emergency, you know. Here's I woke up this morning and I read this article that said we're $1 trillion in debt with our credit cards, and Kamala Harris is saying we're $400 away from every household in America collapsing into financial ruin. Um, and as an American, I don't even know how to react to this. And I believe there's a trend if you read the Pew report that said Pew Research Center that says less people are using cash to a major degree. Like if 20% of households weren't using cash a few years ago, well, 50% aren't using cash now. So if you're not using cash, it's got to be going through some way. I doubt debit cards. I'm assuming it's credit cards, which naturally would make credit card balances go up. And so, emergency press conference because clearly the world is burning financially. And I'm going to turn it over to you and let's get into it.
Well, so
Go
let's
ahead,
talk, let's
Jonathan.
talk about that because one of the things that's interesting about that is that if you read on CNN, the statistic is Americans now have a record amount of credit card, and they use the word debt. They say $1 trillion in credit card debt. But if you actually read the original report from the New York Fed, what the New York Fed says is that Americans now have $1 trillion in credit card balances. And that's a distinction with a difference. Because the reality is what we're talking about is if you or I use our credit card today and pay off the balance in full at the end of the month, is that debt?
But
Well,
is
kind
a
of.
balance reported only at the end of the month? Is that the only time?
Well, so that's the interesting thing is a credit card company reports balances at different times. And I think what often happens is the
Wait,
credit
wait,
card.
wait, wait, wait. So you're telling me that it could just be I'm moving. I used to pay X percent from cash, and now I'm paying X percent on my credit card, but I still pay off my credit card at the end of the month. But based on when they pull the data, could make it look like I have debt, which you just corrected and said balances of a greater extent, which I might not.
Almost certainly. In fact, the reality is if you have a credit card and you use the credit card, whatever balance is on it when it's reported, that's part of that $1 trillion. Even if you are going to pay it off in full when your payment is due. And so we're talking about credit card balances. And now, so is it a crisis? A little bit, kind of, not really, sort of, because you said this at the beginning of your question, which is if I'm not using cash anymore and I'm doing all of my purchases through credit cards, well, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm using debt to buy everything I use, but my purchases are going through a credit card instead of cash.
Mm.
And that's showing up in this number. And so the question is how much of this number is true and honest debt? How much of this number is Americans out of control spending? And how much of this number is more and more, a greater percentage of the population is moving further and further away from cash? So anytime
And,
you
and,
have
and
that,
let me
go.
ask a different question,
Okay.
okay? Okay, why is $1 trillion a big number? There's hundreds of millions of households, and if you divide the trillion by hundreds of millions of households, it's not a huge number. Why is $1 trillion even a big number?
Well, you tell me if it's a big number. We're talking about $4,000 per adult.
So it's a big number.
That feels like a big number, right? In terms of, because we're not talking about $4,000 even per household. We are talking about $4,000 per adult. So, short answer is it a big number? Yes. It will. And let's be really honest. It's a big number for people who are carrying the credit card debt. And that's about half of credit card users are carrying credit card debt. And here's the other dirty little secret. not all Americans, not all American adults have a credit card. So we can't even say it's $4,000 per American with a credit card. It's probably more like $6,000 or $7,000 per American with credit card.
So listen, so I get it. Less people should carry less balances. Maybe this is a sign of a bad economy. Maybe it's just a sign of people use different things to pay their bills in different ways. I don't know. So when they put these articles out there, it's literally like the world is coming to an end from bankruptcy. There's $1 trillion of debt. But wouldn't the greater thing say is average debt balance carried over a certain period of time? Like, is there other ways to look at this that would make us understand? Because, I mean, the other big issue is everybody reports about these things, but they don't actually talk about, so what does it mean to the average American? How does the average American improve their life? How do they reduce it from $1 trillion, or we're $400 away from bankruptcy? So it's like you read these articles, which get great clicks, creates urgency. My kids feel like there's no future in the world. Everybody can't afford to live. And so is it really an emergency? Or should we start to have different conversations?
Well, here's the problem. I think it is both an emergency and it is not emergency. Our world is so complicated. Let me put it another way. That New York Fed report that reported on this, they're not including student debt, which is also going up significantly. They're not counting personal loans. They're not counting mortgage. So all of this other debt is also hanging over Americans. Some of that debt is good. In some ways, student loan is good because if you get a degree and you can earn more because of that degree, that's not necessarily bad debt. A mortgage is a debt that can actually increase wealth, right? So some of these things are not a problem. When it becomes a problem is that when individuals are buried under more debt than they can actually service. And I think there's no question that is also happening. But again, to your point, the population is getting bigger. So we're talking about total balances across the balance. So next year, there will be another record. 10 years from now, there will be another record. The question is that a bad thing or a good thing? Or not
so I guess the question Americans should be asking themselves is 3. 1, the money you have, is it working as hard as it possibly could? 2, the debt you have, is your debt working as hard as it possibly can be? And I think that is probably the conversation that people should start to have around their kitchen table. So example number 1, is your money working as hard? The simplest way is my interest rate I get on my bank accounts the highest it possibly can be in FDIC insured, accounts? 2, if I do have debt, is my amount I have to pay, right, as low as it can be? And there's lots of ways to to really manage that and make sure you get that down. And the third thing is my credit score the best it can be? And there's lots of ways to do that. And so it really sounds like when the media says these things, it actually does nothing but nothing. It's just like hot air. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't help anything. It's a fake emergency because they're stopping people with their stuff. And I know that the Yukon Project, which is really a great place for people to go to help them understand these things, is really trying to help people understand what to do with their financial futures, with their current earnings, with their current savings, with their current debt, to give them a chance to get ahead.
Yeah, and let me even say that what we're talking about is we're talking about macroeconomic trends, and we're talking about individuals, right? And
everybody will tell you, and they hate being told that they're like an average because we're all individuals, right?
And that's the reality. Is the most painful part about even these conversations is what is really good for the individual is not always the story that's told in the media. And let me give you a great example. It would be fantastic for us individually if we were spending less on things we don't need and incurring less debt. Absolutely. But I'll tell you right now, if that actually happened across the entire country and everybody started spending less, I promise you the next CNN article would be the crisis in the economy, because we've built an economy on consumption. And in fact, that's exactly what's going on in China right now. They don't have a consumption economy, and their economy is struggling right now because the manufacturing is down, real estate is in trouble, and they don't have that engine of growth that is in your economy that we have, which is consumption. So it's problematic because the media is almost always going to give you the narrative that sounds the worst. What we need to do as individuals is recognize what's best for us, our families, our finances, and our future, and work towards that, and not pay attention to whether the CNN says the sky is falling or whether the Fed is worried about something. Because the reality is,
Kamala Harris says you're $400 away from bankruptcy.
Yeah. And that's a great example. That idea of Americans being $400 away from bankruptcy is actually a misstatement of data that was saying that almost half of Americans couldn't come up with a $400 bill, cover a $400 bill without borrowing something or putting it on a credit card or whatnot. And that may not even be saying that they're going into debt to do it. It just may mean that, what's in their bank account at any given moment isn't ready to be pulled out in cash. So once again, it's statistics that people throw around without understanding what it is. So when we manage our personal finances, manage your personal finances based on what's right for you, not based on what's in the big news stories of the day, because that almost certainly is not going to be useful for you.
Yeah. And so I would say, just to kind of like maybe wrap this up is, look, yeah, this is a call to action, but the call to action isn't, oh my gosh, the world's coming to an end. The call to action is, hey, is your debt working as hard as it can be? Is your income working as hard as it could be? Are your savings working as hard as it could be? Are you leveraging your available credit utilization on your credit cards effectively? Are you managing your credit score effectively? And are you staying within your budget effectively?
I think that's exactly right. I think the key is when you read statistics like that, instead of just wagging your finger at everybody or even thinking that the world is, like you say, the sky is falling, the most important thing is to just kind of look inward and say, where am I? Am I where I want to be? And what can I do right now to improve my personal financial resilience and kind of make myself in a better position financially?
Well, yeah, thanks for getting on this emergency press conference. I now feel better about my Saturday. Before, I thought the world was coming to an end and nobody was going to be able to pay their bills and we were all going to end on the food line. So thank you, Jonathan.